Welcome to Season 3 of The Unforgiving 60 with your hosts, Ben Pronk and Tim Curtis. As two ex-SAS guys armed with MBAs, Ben and Tim seek out people leading lives less ordinary and talk with them about how they fill their unforgiving minutes and what helps them go, always, a little further. Like intellectual bowerbirds, we aim to collect shiny little objects of knowledge that we think can help build better humans.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Unforgiving 60. I'm Ben Pronk.
And I'm still here and I'm Tim Curtis. I've not been sacked yet. Miracle.
Unbelievably. I like our guest this week.
Rear Admiral Lee Goddard.
We first met Lee on the high seas. I first met Lee on the high seas.
Sure. Well, in fact, let's go back a step because I first met him as a cadet where he was the Academy Cadet Captain at the Australian Defence Force Academy, a role that you later had. And that was 1989. And unbelievable as a senior cadet, 3 years in, the leadership that he showed as the Academy Cadet Captain was really inspiring. Just a guy who just did all of the little things right. And to a follower that's observing a leader, even though the leader is a cadet, you're looking out for the things that they don't do right. The standard you walk past is a standard you accept, so the story goes. And he set very high standards.
That's awesome. And continued to do that, obviously, throughout his military career. You don't get to be a two-star without doing that. But my first meeting, which you were there for, was during that operation to recover the Pong Su. We embarked on Lee's ship, the HMAS Stuart, and we were debating before what his role was. I thought it was navigator.
Incorrect. Executive officer.
You reckon it was XO?
Do you think we'll get a chance to talk about the Pong Su? I haven't talked about that for a little while.
Strap in. I reckon Lee will be lucky to get a word in edgeways this episode.
What's the point of having him on the show?
Let's try not to talk about our view of the Pong Su. I'm really interested in his. We have caught up since then, but clearly the whole naval aspect of it, just the the sheer environmental aspect, putting an Anzac class frigate into those seas on that intercept course, finding this vessel, going through the laws of the escalation procedures. I think that would be a fascinating conversation with him.
What is an army unit?
A unit is the sort of equivalent of a ship. So a unit is a battalion or a regiment-sized organisation, about, what do you say, 700-800 people, commanded by a lieutenant colonel, autonomous sort of organisation.
So in the Navy, the unit is the ship, isn't it? And he commanded HMAS Parramatta, the Anzac-class frigate, as well as holding other appointments on a range of other ships, including coalition ships, including service in the Middle East. But he was also on the sail training ship Young Endeavour.
This will be a cool story. That's a beautiful old tall ship that the Navy still maintains, and I'm interested in the difference between setting to sea in an Anzac-class warship versus a Young Endeavour-class tall ship.
He also commanded Maritime Border Command in 2019. He served in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. And more recently, he's transitioned out of full-time uniform, although I think he's still a reservist, and into the Minderoo Foundation. And we're going to talk about his role inside Andrew Forrest's foundation, Minderoo, and in particular, the sorts of initiatives that they're rolling out, of which there are many, and they are all fascinating.
Sounds like a good episode.
Let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Unforgiving 60 podcast. I'm Tim Curtis with my co-host Ben Pronk.
How are you, Tim?
I'm very well, and I'm even more happy because today I've got two former Australian Defence Force Academy cadet captains.
Yeah.
We have Lee Goddard on the show. Lee, welcome to the Unforgiving 60 podcast.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Ben. Great to be here, and thanks for inviting me to join you and your audience.
So, Rear Admiral Lee Goddard, could you précis up your sort of early life into uniform and what got you to where you are today?
I actually decided to join the Navy my last year at school in 1986, and I was a boy from the burbs of Melbourne, inspired by movies like Top Gun and jingles like "You'll be wet, you'll be tired, you'll be homesick," but the pride of the fleet will be you.
That's right. I forgot
pride
that
of the fleet. Yeah, I forgot that.
In the days when our Navy was young and the ship was the pride of the fleet, they'd gaze out at her in wonder, make an old sailor's heart skip a beat. Well, the ships have gone through some changes and the roles have changed a bit too. You'll be wet, you'll be homesick and frightened, but the pride of the fleet will be you.
That was great. That jingle was fantastic. It really made me want to join the Navy.
Oh, I still think about it. It's been my cycle all the way through my career, and of course, ADFA, this new Camelot for young women and men had been created in Canberra. But actually, what in the end got me to join the Navy was visiting. I think it was HMAS Dana right at Station Pier and meeting a young sub-lieutenant. In fact, there was a bunch of us scruffy boys, and he probably was the most together and focused and seen the world and most probably the best leader that I actually probably related to. And he was only 22, 23, I guess. And I remember a group of us went, I want to be just like him. So that was a moment that I decided to join the Navy. And of course, it started at the Australian Defence Force Academy, as you both well know, Tim and Ben. Of course, Tim, you were there a couple of years while I was there. And then, of course, a full-time career finished, I guess, in January of this year, 34 years later. I've transferred to the active reserve, and I still stay in touch very much with the Navy, the Defence Force, our national security apparatus, and I'll still do some reserve time. But yeah, 34-year journey. And I said it before, the reason I joined really was for service and adventure. I got it, every day, service and adventure. And, even joining Minderoo, with great values alignment and, being valued and, where you can add the most value and impact, it's a continuation of that service and adventure. And I think that's what we all strive for and thrive in those as well, as I'm sure you've both experienced too.
First question for a career sailor. Do you get seasick? Have you ever been seasick, Lee?
I don't get motion sick. I've done quite a bit of offshore sailing over the years, and I get salt water in the air and fatigued, but I actually don't get motion sick. Certainly I've been with a lot of people who do.
I was going to say, including a squadron of SAS people, and which we'll talk about.
I think Tim was sleeping on my deck when I was the second in command of HMAS Stuart during Pong Su in 2003, and I remember he was looking pretty green at times as well. So and I wasn't helping him at all, telling him there's only the first stage of seasickness is that terrible stage when you think you're going to die, and then there's that really terrible stage.
Well, in my defence, I've never been seasick, and I was probably one of the few on that operation that wasn't ill, and Ben was with me.
Jesus, I was. Yeah, I was crook.
But I have...
actually, it can be great comfort seeing these troopers and how they were coping with the seas at the time. It was true. But, Nelson got seasick every day of his life. And so when you do the Sydney Hobart yacht race, there's 3 questions in a row you ask. 1, do you get seasick? Because if you get seasick, there's no point. 2, are you physically fit? And 3rd, by the way, can you sail? Because in reality,
fair enough.
If you get seasick, you're just dead weight. So...
we're going to circle back to the Pong Su later, but curious because you have just transitioned, and whilst life in uniform is still very fresh in your mind, to someone that was thinking about joining Army, Navy, Air Force, but specifically the Navy, what have you been able to take from your first career and apply in your second career?
I probably Tim, I would get back to that that reason that I joined. What is your purpose? And for most Australians, it actually does relate to service and adventure, I'd say. And I think, if that's your purpose as a young age, as a young lady or a young bloke, around the 20s, I couldn't think of any better career to fulfil that. Mm-hmm. Not every day is a good day over 30, 35 years, as we all know, but the opportunities to actually to serve your community, serve your country, serve at a global level, and actually to experience the adventures along the way. I have no doubt that the Navy gave me that in spades. In fact, I often say the Navy owes me nothing. I owe it everything, really over the last 35 years from a professional perspective. And the same Army and Air Force. And because I was at the Australian Defence Force Academy in those early days, and you were both there as well, to work, to meet, first of all, at the Australian Defence Force Academy, young women and men from all over Australia, from all different, parts of Australian society, from private school boys who've been at boarding school all their lives to single parent young women or men, kind of really only just got into ADFA and then just thrived, and to meet West Australians literally for the first time. And I mean that. The only thing I'd probably even met in Western Australia before I went to heard a lot about them. Confirmed some things about Western Australians as well when I did that. But to actually have that experience, this kind of, and then to come together as a group, and then over a very short period, to be a team, it really is. It's just not only is it exciting, it's so fulfilling as well. So I think the Australian Defence Force, we've all seen other defence forces around the world, but I think even more so from my experience, it's just provided all the things that I wanted at the time, and I've got no doubt that still applies in 2021. As I said, I was just a boy from the suburbs of Melbourne, and nothing against suburbs of Melbourne, but it was escapism, and escapism of the very best kind.
And I think when I look back on my career, there's all those things you mentioned, all the tangible skills, all the sort of experiential stuff. But for me, there's also those tiny little snapshots. And I remember things like flying down the Brisbane River in a Black Hawk at night about to assault the casino in a mock exercise. Those little vignettes that no matter how rich you are, no matter what other things you have at your disposal, you could never ever get outside of that context. And I imagine you must have had a number of those sorts of things in your Navy career. Do any stick out to mind in your mind in terms of just those amazing Navy experiences?
Look, well, first of all, how do you judge success? I once get told true success is who tells the best stories at a dinner table, and they're actually true. And even now, you probably both use it, use our experiences to tell a story, tell a narrative, especially in your current businesses and focus, which you're very good at. But even where I am now, it's really important to actually to review and reflect and then tell those stories. Look, I've got plenty of stories, either at sea or either in, operations, whether it be border protection or in the South China Sea or, in Iraq and Afghanistan or my best experiences, I think, are still the human experiences. And I've said this actually in a previous podcast. I think the best moments of my career was not just the privilege of reaching the pinnacle by commanding a warship, is when you're actually a part of a team and you're leading that team, and rather than that team saying, there's the captain, they say, that's my captain. You've actually succeeded then in so many levels. And it really is a really powerful moment. So I think my most powerful and important and the moments I'm most proud of is probably at sea, either commanding or second in command or leading the boarding party, and realising that to that team you're their leader, and you're giving them what they need, not what they want. And I think they're really powerful experiences. And of course, there's been other fantastic things. Searching for MH370. To be there with Chinese warships, Chinese Coast Guard, and our common adversary was the search itself and the sea itself. Fortunately, we didn't find MH370, but to be part of that, to be doing boarding party operations, and to be 7 days, involved in a particular very challenging situation, a very emotive, moral, ethical, and physical situation, and to be with these incredible sailors, soldiers, females, males, of all parts of Australian society, and to see them at their best in those most challenging circumstances. 3 o'clock in the morning, being proud that you actually led this team in the most challenging circumstances. And there's other special moments. I was very privileged to command HMAS Perth in 2013 during the Fleet Review. When I first joined the Navy, I remember seeing the Fleet Review of 1986 and 1988, those big diagrams of all the ships in Sydney Harbour, and then to actually, almost 30 years later, to actually command, I guess, the flagship for the Fleet Review. It's really very, very special. The final thing I'd just say one thing I'm also is to see how you developed yourself over the years. And I'm most proud, not so much what I achieved, but how I achieved it. But the first time I went on a bridge, seeing a captain with binoculars and everyone looking at the back of the head of the captain in a really terrible situation, it wasn't going right, and seeing the captain just say all the right things and the whole team focus behind him. And then to be in that same circumstance 25 years later, binoculars at the bridge and seeing feeling the whole team looking at the back of the head, knowing that you were in command and you were leading. Ironically, though, when you actually are looking through the binoculars, you realise, I don't really know what I'm doing here.
Exactly.
Start out of your mouth, you start saying and doing stuff, and you go, where did that come from? By the way, that sounds really good, but all that experience, all that nurturing, all those great sailors, and I say as much as officers, have kind of, sometimes read your horoscope and actually have moulded you, nurtured you to that pinnacle in your career. So it's a long answer, Ben, but probably my best experiences, sure, there have been like Seahawks, over all platforms in the Northern Arabian Gulf and all that kind of high adrenaline stuff. But I reckon the most powerful and enduring experiences are those human ones.
Well, let's go to when you were least experienced. You graduated from ADFA, did your bridge watchkeeping certificate, I think, in 1992. And then peculiarly, you had an appointment as a watch officer and the executive officer on sail training ship Young Endeavour. Can you talk about the Young Endeavour and your role as a newly minted young sub-lieutenant on the ship?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Look, I think there's been about 4 or 5 moments in my career I've had senior officers or other people go, what are you doing? Why are you doing that?
Yes.
And then I think I had the option. I actually had been selected to be a flag lieutenant, and I chose to go to Young Endeavour. Best decision I ever made, because it was just a fantastic adventure and it was a very special experience. The first thing was leadership. Up to that point, I'd been with people who generally did as they're told. You get to a tool ship, you've got all the young Australians and they go, why, what, etc. And it was completely different kind of leadership style. You had to, a bunch of young, sometimes scared Australians. You had to kind of convince them about what they're doing in very tough sea conditions. So a really good experience. One thing actually, it really consolidated a view I had about young women and young men. And I found that young men had this real fear of showing fear. They didn't like to show fear, where young women had, didn't have that same kind of fear in some ways. The number of times I'd be on Young Endeavour in the middle of the night and having to go to the topsail, 30 metres up and pulling up these huge sails, and you'd be kind of, because the storm would hit or school would come in, and I'd look on the top yard and next to me there would be generally 1 or 2 young women, not young men, next to me. Those really tough circumstances, doing the hard yards, looking at me, trusting me, and up we'd go. Where the young men had kind of make some excuses and didn't want to, show fear, so they kind of, it was just a really powerful reinforcement as well of not stereotypically. It was just really. It took me away from the disciplined Navy, Army, Air Force, and back into the real Australia and seeing the real Australia through a tool ship. It was a fantastic experience. Young Endeavour is basically like a 3-bedroom house, put 24 young Australians on it, make it wet and shake it for 5 days to see what happens. Well, social.
Sounds like a reality show. In fact, your story of being the first posting to a Young Endeavour reminds me of an Air Force colleague of mine, and apparently at the end of pilot's course they'd have a big dining-in night and they'd announce where they were going, what kind of aircraft type they'd go to. And so they'd put up, Flight Lieutenant blogs, and then they'd show a silhouette of an F-18 and, yay, he's going to fighters. And then, Flight Lieutenant Jones, and they'd show a silhouette of a C-130, yay, he's going to Stratlift. And apparently they showed this guy, his name's up on the board, and they put a silhouette of a hot air balloon. His first post was to fly the Air Force promotional hot air balloon. So, yeah, very, very interesting.
These shows, I'm sure we did well. On Young Endeavour, I did have two serious incidents. I had a young lady fall from the topmast, 25 metres down. I actually did look at her and think we had a fatality. So that really, and I guess we're attuned to the fact that the nature of business as military is that we will face that, and we have faced that in different circumstances throughout our careers. But to see a young Australian on the deck, and actually having to deal with that, and actually, and not long after that, we had a young lady fall from the topmast into her kind of belt system and actually stopped breathing as well. So they were a very powerful experience as well. It wasn't actually people who expected to actually put their lives in danger. These were young Australians. And I'm proud about how the team dealt with that as well. It's interesting when people are under pressure, and you would both know far more than me, that things aren't going right when those who normally talk a lot shut up, and those who normally say, who don't say much start talking, and people start behaving differently, and then trying to get them all kind of in the right direction to deal with a really challenging situation. And in both those incidents, I overrated a couple of people who didn't perform, and I underrated a couple of people who actually just were superb in the most stressful of situations. So there were a couple of other experiences from Young Endeavour.
So, head cadet at the Australian Defence Force Academy, you were awarded the Sword of Leadership. You went to the Royal Australian Navy College in Jervis Bay and won the Queen's Medal. And from the sail training ship Young Endeavour, you go and complete your Principal Warfare Officer's course and your ducks of that as well. Is there anything you haven't topped, Lee?
I sat next to some great people during my exams. Michelle was there. She probably had the neatest writing if she ever listens into this that I've ever known. So, look, life's a marathon, not a sprint. So when I had to study hard, I did study hard. I'm not the perfect student. I'm not the perfect officer, but I realised in those, when you had to put your head down and study hard, that was pretty important to do that. With the obviously ADFA was a brilliant experience. 3 years there, and I know Tim, you were there. A couple of years below me, and
open brackets, far less distinguished. Close brackets.
Were you studying hard? Were you putting your head down when you had to?
No, but I did pass, and I didn't fail anything. Nothing above 60%. 16 straight passes. Got a 49% actually conceded pass. Less distinguished.
Yeah, well, look, I think didn't they used to have a pass mark there called pass conceding, which means you got 45 to 50%, which the department said, right, we'll pass you, but never come back to this department ever again.
Is it? Yeah, it's we've spent a lot of money on you. Yeah, okay, we're getting you through.
There's that wonderful saying. There's that wonderful saying. Sort of 51%.
1%
wasted effort, 49% wasted year. Okay, so from your PWOS course, you go and join Anzac class frigates, and there are a few of them. Can you describe life on board a naval warship, what that's like as a junior officer up into senior officers, and the sort of pressure and stressors of leading a warship? It's pretty unrelenting, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I'll come back to the Anzac warships which were built down in Williamstown, because I'm really proud to have been part of that story. Because we now talk about the latest and greatest warships of this generation in 2021. Of course, in the mid-90s, they were the latest and greatest. First of all, warships are, as an ecosystem, are quite remarkable. They're very team-focused. They're, lots of different personalities. You've basically got 200 metres or 150 metres basically to go one way or the other away from humans you either want to be with every day or sometimes don't want to be with either. So you've got to really adapt and actually be and understand that you may be a leader of the system, but you're also one individual in the system as well. My initial experiences in warships was probably the older generation midshipmen, where you actually slept and ate initially with the men in the big mess decks, with 60, 70 sailors, which I think was probably the most important leadership and nurturing experience for me in my career. To be with hardened sailors who are looking at you every day thinking you're the person who's going to lead us. And we're going to give you a hard time on horoscope, but we're going to make sure that we prepare you to lead us as well. And in fact, after leaving the mess deck of HMAS Perth, the number 2 destroyer, in 1990, I remember sailors telling me that, we'll give you a hard time as an officer, but, that's what Australians do. But the moment you stop behaving like an officer is when we really will give you a hard time, because we have expectations and we've just invested in you for the last 3 or 4 months. So that's one part of warship, the human part. The second thing I'd say on a warship, you can tell, I reckon, within about the first 15 minutes whether this warship is humming, whether it's effective, whether it's it's a happy ship, it's a well-honed ship, and whether it's ready to fight and win at sea. And I think for those who experienced in it, you can just tell by the way that you are greeted by the people on board, the sense of ownership, the sense of teamship, the respect, but the empowerment on board as well. That's how. And then thirdly, with a warship, of course, it is your home. You spend 6 to 9 months. You may only have literally when you first go to see a bunk. It could be less than 1 metre high and 2 metres long, and that's actually and then everything around you is your home, and the people you live with are your family, and it's really, really, really powerful to be part of that as well, and to experience it firsthand. It's sad actually to see after long deployment some sailors can't give it up. It's sad, but some sailors within 2 days of going home, they should be having a family go back to the ship because it's so powerful. They're the ones we shake and say, "What are you doing? Get home." Yeah. But that's the kind of powerful experience after being away for 6 to 8 months.
I was going to ask about that and the attachment or the relationship with the ship itself. They develop characters, don't they? That attachment you just mentioned. I remember someone telling me about, I think they're hot crewing patrol boats now, and it was a really different thing when it wasn't your ship. It was just something you jumped in and out of. Can you comment on that, the ship as a sort of character in itself?
Yeah, look, I think the ownership and custodianship of a ship is a really powerful reflection of a crew and a team. Yeah, absolutely. You become part of, you realise you're part of the institution that is the ship. You have a small 2-year or 3-year window in its life, and how important and how privileged that is as well. And of course we often carry on the ship's names, or there's an association with a town or an indigenous grouping such as Arunta or Warramunga, and it's a really powerful association. I mean, we've probably come to Pong-Su on HMAS Stuart, of course, it was called the Tartan Terror, and all those associations with the Scottish Australian heritage. People were really proud of that. The Braveheart kind of persona of that ship really shone through in everything we did. There's just pride of HMAS Stuart, that ship, the ones that have gone before, and the legacy for those that would come, in the future as well. Named Stuart.
Well, 2001 to 2003, you were the executive officer of HMAS Stuart, and our paths crossed in 2003 with the interception of the North Korean drug ship Pong-Su. We were talking off-air about how much we've talked about it, and maybe our observations weren't right. What are your recollections and observations of that operation to board and seize the Pong-Su?
Well, first, HMAS Stuart, commissioning her down at Williamstown was just a terrific crew, a terrific team. Really was, I still keep in very close contact with them. And just prior to Easter 2003, we'd been deployed on border protection operations. We actually spent Christmas at Christmas Island. There's actually a song called Christmas Island. You've got better things to do, but it's a very important experience. So we had commissioned that ship, I think, in August 2002, done some intense testing. I'd spent a long time on border protection, probably at the height of our border protection challenges to Australia. I spent Christmas Island. So the team was ready. We were, I think just leading up to Easter, we were going into a long break, so we'd sent a lot of our crew away after, really 6 months, almost non-stop operations at sea or assessments. I just remember the call, and we can talk more openly now. The intelligence reports coming in and the cueing that something may be happening with a very unusual situation, and it's now public. That originated in our waters, west and south of our continent, and then, of course, is coming up the East Australian coast. And that Stuart, we know that you've just come back from a long deployment. We know that you've got a lot of crew away, but you are the ship that's in the best position to respond to this, so stand by.
Have you been to India? 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 Well, you better get some of it, India. Have you been to India? There's shit that will blow ya.
I remember joining the ship and actually feeling this sense of relief that you were the XO. I thought, geez, people talk about networking at the Australian Defence Force Academy, but that was living proof of it. And I remember boarding the ship thinking, geez, I hope Lee remembers me, otherwise this is going to be an absolute fizzer. But you went above and beyond, in fact, in so very many ways to accommodate a stinking SAS squadron coming on board, including giving up, nearly a religious artefact, the wardroom.
I remember that. We actually, of course, our wardroom, our officers' mess, and that essentially was the central point for your briefings and where you are obviously living and rehearsing, a lot, which by the way, you allowed me to be part of that, and that was actually a real privilege to see what I already knew, the professionalism of the regiment, in particular in this type of mission. If you recall, Ben and Tim, it was really deciding who was the best, security agency, first responder to deal with the situation. And clearly, the regiment, because of the nature of the potential threat, and we weren't absolutely sure where this situation would go. And, again, it's on the public record that, obviously a North Korean vessel, North Korean crew, narcotics, murder, obviously a death at sea, and a whole lot of issues obviously building up to that. So the only assumption was, at the right edge of especially what this North Korean crew might do in terms of not letting us on board or whatever we needed to do. But of course, we actually also had New South Wales Police on, we had Federal Police, we had Navy Clearance divers, I think TAG East had just formed up, we had the Australian Customs. So actually, from an interagency perspective, it was really, I think it worked really well in terms of having everyone on board and the camaraderie and the understanding of what each of those parts of our system would do in this operation. And to be frank, I thought ego was left aside. And I think it's because it was the right personalities at the right time. In fact, many people afterwards said it was an exemplar of an interagency operation as much as a focus, get the special forces, the regiment, to where it needs to be to do its job and deliver this. It wasn't a law enforcement effect, it was a significant Australian effect to deal with this issue.
It's funny you mentioned that. I distinctly remember we'd rocked up, and as you mentioned, TAG East was relatively newly formed at that stage, and they were standing by, obviously, in Sydney where they were home based. And we made it over on the Qantas aircraft and essentially took over as the assault force from them, which must have been, at a professional level, really sort of an anticlimax for them and disappointing. But I do remember them giving us their boarding poles, giving us equipment, being nothing but positive and supportive of the team, even though they must have been really disappointed themselves. And I mean, no matter what's happened between the two units since, and it's had its highs and lows, I definitely remember that incredible collegiate and mission-first attitude in that little vignette.
Yeah, and you're right. And of course, we had the Australian Federal Police, New South Wales Police, and of course, Team 1, the Navy Clearance divers as well. Look, I'm sure there was some kind of moments of I wouldn't say attention, but but I think the behaviour of the collective to get the job done was really very impressive. And I think it was, we're disciplined. That's the right way to approach. To be frank, both you, Ben, and Tim as well significantly contributed to that. So right personalities at the right time as well. I mean, as XR, of course, as much as you're responsible for operations, you're also the hotel manager, of a ship. so getting everyone on board with, not just the humans and their equipment, but their weapons, their systems, and not just the kinetic, but the non-kinetic systems as well. It was quite I'm sure afterwards I had a couple of yeah, right, you did it this time, but don't ever do it like that again. But we made it work. We made it,
I've been waiting for years to work out who the manager of that particular hotel was, because I've got a complaint.
I've got a big complaint. I wasn't allocated a room. I slept for an hour or so on the floor of the wardroom, I think, before orders.
I mean, I joke, we spoke about seasickness before, but I do remember we were heads down trying to plan, and I don't even remember the ship steaming. That's how much, we started planning while it was alongside in Potts Point. Obviously started moving, but the next thing I remember, things are getting a bit lumpy as we got outside of the heads, and then, my God, I was crook for about that first sort of 36-hour period.
Not as crook as your signaller.
No, we had members who, in fact, two funny vignettes. My signaller was absolutely incapacitated, and they put him right at the keel, basically along the lowest point in the ship. Is that standard sort of Navy protocol, Lee?
Yeah.
To try and sort of minimise the movement. And he was on intravenous saline, and I remember just as we'd secured the Pong Su, we literally said, stronghold secured. Then he pops up, "This India Charlie, ready to go." It's like, oh, dude,
it's all over.
It. But the other funny one, they'd embarked a Navy surgeon as part of this mission, not normal part of the ship's complement. And one of our team leaders, Rolls, hit him up at one stage during the planning saying, look, a number of the boys are getting really sick. Have we got some meds that we can administer to try and lessen the burden? And the surgeon looked at him pensively, nodded his head, and then threw up all over him. So the poor surgeon was crook as well.
Oh, it's horrible. All right, so let's move on. You then commanded Parramatta, Lee, and in doing so you won the Duke of Gloucester Award. Can you talk about that command of a warship and that award?
Yeah, look, I mean, first off, it was my first, command, and where, I guess that's the pinnacle of your career. You're the captain of the ship, and so that was a real privilege. And Parramatta, of course, has a very famous ship, in terms of the previous Parramattas, and she just returned from the Gulf and had won a meritorious unit citation. So I was inheriting a very good ship, and inheriting a good ship means you've got to make sure you continue to keep. It's one of the toughest things to do. You always, in some ways, you always want a ship that's not going so well, so you have a chance to do all it rather than maintain.
David Marquette style.
That's right. So that was a real privilege. Actually, I had an incident early on in my command. We were doing our workups, and I think I was a bit full of myself, and the team was a bit confident as well. We had a major setback. We actually nearly had a sailor die. It was a diving accident. We actually had to go to an inquiry as well. And, we came out of it fine, but it really threw us out for about 3 months. We lost our momentum. We probably lost some of our confidence as well. So that was probably then the opportunity to either thrive or, to be frank, fail. So that was the first year. As the first year captain, you get the balance right some days, not other days. You try and be this very inclusive, empathetic captain, but what did surprise me the first year as a captain is I was probably more uncompromising than I thought I would be. And you kind of have to. You really, that leadership of giving people what they need, not what they want, and being far more direct in certain things. In fact, I forgave all those grumpy, uncompromising captains whoever I worked for, because I realised often actually captains were grumpy because they were physically tired. And you have to really look after yourself, really do. Because, in the middle of the night, say going to the Malacca Straits or going in air, you could be called 6-7 times. You're always on edge. Second year of my command, which is natural, you relax into it. You become so much more self-assured. Actually, you find with your team, the less you say, the better they do. That's probably a lesson for life of all of us. And we're very fortunate that year I was there to be awarded the Gloucester Cup, which is, I think with the Air Force and Army have similar, which is the the best performing ship, and I guess the ship that is judged to most reflect Navy's values, but also in terms of to be the most operationally efficient ship as well. So that was a real privilege.
Sorry, Lee. So at that point, you were literally the pride of the fleet. You had fulfilled that recruiting ad.
And you were wet and homesick and frightened as well?
I shamelessly played that jingle every single time we came alongside. So I was I still do as well. But no, it was because when you join a ship, you don't necessarily want it to be the best. You want it to be the best it can be. You can't always be the best, and there's a whole lot of circumstances there. It could be a program, or there could be something unfortunate, your missile launcher doesn't work, or you just simply don't have maybe the people at the start, maybe who either had the experience. You've just got to make the team the best it can be. I reckon the first year we weren't the best, but we were the best we could be. In the second year, were we the best? Others will judge that, but we remained the best we could be. And I think that's probably, it's a bit like that, it's not what you achieve, it's how you achieve it. I think that's, you have to reflect on that.
Now, from one side of Lake Burley Griffin, on the military side, you crossed over to Parliament House and did time with the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. Can you describe what you did there and observations on Australian politics from the perspective of a military officer?
Yeah, look, I was quite happy being in Sydney, as I was then the commander of the surface fleet, or the large warships of the navies, the new helicopter carriers, frigates, destroyers, and I then got called up to be advisor establishing a one-star position in Prime Minister and Cabinet, and not focused on security, but focused. I was actually going to go into the international policy branch head position, provide international policy advice. And the reason why they did that really as much as to expose a Defence Force officer to the Barton system, the central agencies, Prime Minister and Cabinet, Treasury, Finance, know where the money is, know where the influence is. It was actually also probably a bit of a benchmarking activity as well, and I almost got that. It was described to me by then Secretary of Defence, and the Chief of Defence was Air Chief Marshal Binskin and Secretary of Defence Dennis Richardson. Basically said, get over there. Some areas you'll feel comfortable, some areas you won't. But that's okay. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to contribute. But there's other areas that we'll actually understand where we are as a Defence Force in terms of in the wider system. So it was a really important experience, and in fact a really enjoyable experience as well. Again, first couple of weeks you're a bit of a trophy and you tell lots of stories and everyone loves you. So after that they say start doing stuff, and you've got to work within the system, and you've got to realise where we as a Defence Force have strengths and where we actually aren't don't have acumen. So in particular, understanding policy and really and understanding the gritty process of actually developing policy as well. I mean, I probably was used to throwing mud at those who used to write and create policy until you're actually in there, part of it. Now I've got great, certainly a greater admiration for them.
So Commander Maritime Border Command was your, if I'm not mistaken, final role in Navy. Can you talk about Border Command and its involvement in our wider border policy?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So actually, I got in the end dual appointed both Commander Maritime Border Command and Commander of the Joint Agency Task Force Operations Sovereign Borders. Essentially, Maritime Border Command, one part of it is actually the de facto Coast Guard of Australia. So combining both Defence Force, Australian Border Force, and other, Australian national security agencies such as state police forces to protect the Australian border, threats to the Australian border. And there's such things as illegal people smuggling, narcotics, foreign interference, exploitation of our economic zones such as exclusive economic zones or offshore territories, Antarctica. So it's huge. And of course, Australia as a continent, our search and rescue zone and our security forces area of authority leading into our littoral borders is about 11% of the Earth's surface. It's huge. And of course, having the situational awareness and the presence and the ability to respond to threats to the Australian border is, it's a challenge. In fact, at any given day, we're probably monitoring about 60 to 70,000 vessels of interest. And we're distilling that down to probably 15, 20 that may threaten our border. By the way, when I say threaten our border, it's actually not just traditional civil maritime threats, as I mentioned, including COVID. It could be interference with our modern sea lands communications, our underwater cables. It could be you're the offshore counter-terrorism lead, anything offshore 3 miles. And you would have done the exercises up off the Northwest Shelf, etc. You are the Australian National Coordinator in terms of actually responding to those threats. It could be, grey zone activities North Australia and the Pacific, etc. as well. So even in Antarctica, that period of cooperation and scientific joint research and non-militarisation, that's behind us. We actually have seen a completely 180 shift in the kind of behaviour there as well. So Command of Maritime Border Command essentially was situational awareness, deterring activity, trying to deal with the threats at their source, especially when it came to people smuggling. I'll come back to Operation Sovereign Waters, and then making sure that the right law enforcement agency was delivered to where it needed to be to deal with civil maritime threats. Under the Maritime Powers Act, that could be the military, could be special forces to deal with offshore counter-terrorism, it could be the Navy to deal with the fisheries issue, it could be the Australian Federal Police to deliver them to deal with the narcotics issue. So, but essentially, it was deterrence, situational awareness, making sure the right law enforcement agency it got to where it needed to be to actually deal with the threat to the Australian border. Of course, last year was I guess all of last year was unique because of COVID and because of cruise ships and small boat lags, which made it even more challenging. The first one I talked about was people smuggling, and of course we've all been involved in that in different forms from border protection, very high priority for the government in terms of the policy and Operation Sovereign Borders. While the boats have been stopped, Operation Sovereign Borders is to ensure they don't start again. So while we are ready in the maritime environment to deal with threats to the border, most threats in that field is now dealt with at its source, where it should be, as far from Australia as it can be. And you can imagine it's a whole of government effort to deal with it at its source as well.
Awesome. So, Lee, that brings us up to your current role and the transition out of military. But before we leave, I want to ask one last ship driving question. Have you ever crashed a ship?
I think we all have crashed a ship. In fact, I remember seeing a warship come alongside when I was a midshipman, and the captain didn't do a very good job putting it in the wharf. I was laughing and getting a big tap on my back of my head by an executive officer saying, "Never last, son," because you actually been in a position yourself, and boy, oh boy, we've all been in positions ourselves. I don't know if actually, there's actually a very famous form you have to fill in when you've actually either crashed a ship or, at the worst case, a grounding. And quite rightly, you have sleepless nights over that as a junior officer, as a navigator, and as a commanding officer. But gee, I've had some close calls. I mean, ship driving is tricky and challenging, and it, especially at Fleet Base West, actually, with the wind and the currents,
Yep.
it can be. And of course, when you're a captain, that's when you're most exposed. Everyone's looking at you, and they all want to say, "My captain's the best ship driver in the fleet." And of course, some days you're not. And
I imagine
doesn't go quite to plan. So,
particularly in high-profile ports like Potts Point or something, I always feel the stress when I'm trying to reverse parallel park on a busy street. I can imagine bringing a bloody LHD alongside in Potts Point could be tricky.
Exactly like you're actually the busiest street in Sydney. There's people everywhere, and you're trying to reverse park. And especially when you've got an admiral on the bridge giving you advice, and you've got an admiral ashore waiting for you, and you've got families. And of course, you've got to act like this very, because sometimes command is a bit of a shark. It's a bit of an act. You've got to act calm all over it, and that was supposed to happen.
that crunch was deliberate. Yeah.
I was going to say, and all your subordinates line the deck at attention in full uniform. So they've got the best seat in the house.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Come on.
Okay, so out of uniform into
Minderoo.
Tatarang.
And in January 2021, this headline appears. Royal Australian Navy Admiral joins Minderoo Foundation to boost resilience efforts, Minderoo being Andrew Forrest's foundation. My first question is, why Minderoo? You could have probably walked into any defence and aerospace company. Top 200 companies on the Australian Stock Exchange would have been eager for your experience and services. Why Minderoo Foundation?
Look, I get back to the 3 V's about values, where you'll be valued and where you think you'll add the most value and make the most impact. So Minderoo ticks all those boxes. Andrew Nicola Forrest founded the Minderoo Foundation 20 years ago. And in 2021, it's across 8 core initiatives and does many great things in terms of taking on difficult, challenging problems of our time, with impact philanthropy at its centre. And impact, when I say impact philanthropy, it's a collective. It's actually working closely with government, with communities, with research sector, with the corporate sector, with other businesses, social capital, venture capital, and being a catalyst for change. And some of the initiatives that Minderoo is focused on includes, some huge challenges, such as, collaborating for the cure for cancer, flourishing oceans, Generation 1, when you're working with our Indigenous communities, walk free in terms of modern slavery. It goes on. But this time last year, of course, Australia had just experienced the Black Summer bushfires, and phenomenal in terms of the scale, by any means. Climate change is occurring. I won't get in the debate about the reasons why, but it is, and extreme weather events causing natural hazards is a significant challenge for Australia, always has been. But in terms of how we deal with it, we seem to be on the same roundabout. We tend to respond, we recover, the resilience part, we bounce back stronger, and then we don't ever seem to be quite prepared for the next event, and we seem to be on the same roundabout, same result. So what excited me was this challenge of using impact philanthropy and this ecosystem, this collective of different parts of the Australian system or global system to solve the most challenging problems of our time. And the one that I've been asked to be part of initially is an enduring problem of natural hazard disasters. So how do we, for example, in terms of our this continuum of resilience, how do we lift communities up? To make sure that those most vulnerable are actually at the level of those actually the most resilient. How do we create healthy landscapes? And from a technical perspective, how do we use low orbit satellites? How do we use drone technology? How do we use our situational tools to deal with, for example, fires? We have the technologies now to perhaps detect a fire at inception. Well, certainly you'd be putting it out within 1 hour. The fires that we've just seen in the Perth Hills, terrible. Imagine if we actually had known where that fire was at inception and got to it within the first hour. What a difference that would have made to those communities. If we had the right modelling or the right systems to actually know exactly where that fire or lightning or whatever was going to strike. And I just say this is one problem, but of course this system of having this collective solving difficult problems, I think is much wider to solve all the problems of our time as we move forward. And I think this decade is an inflection point. COVID, climate change, geostrategic issues, perhaps they say that for every decade, but I think we need to understand that government is only one part of the solution, even of the leadership, and there's other parts of the system now. So that's the reason why. I was commuting to Canberra for the last 4 or 5 years, and my family's in Sydney. That's where my community is. And I made a personal decision that if I was going to reorientate and do something different at 51 years of age, and now 52, I wanted to do it then. The actual realisation that the best time of your life isn't ahead of you, thrusting ahead, or even behind you in terms of entitlement or what you did, etc. It's actually right now. So you've got to really work out where you think, as I said, the values align, where you'll be most valued, but most importantly, where you think you're going to add the most value, where you can make the most impact. Minderoo, its overarching, drive is make impact and make impact fast. And for me, that's really appealing.
One more question on resilience. What makes a resilient community? What's the Minderoo thesis on that?
Yeah, look, resilience is a much wider word now. And we talk about resilience, some talk about national resilience in terms of supply chains, ability to be independent, especially during the COVID environment. But for a resilient community, holistically for Australia, or at a town level, or at a small level, it's all the components of leadership, preparation, communication, having systems in place to prepare as much as to respond. So it's the continuum of resilience. I mean, resilience by definition is bouncing back stronger after a setback or an event. We have changed that slightly to say it's a continuum of resilience. It's actually about adaptation at the same time. So that you actually, inevitably Australia will suffer catastrophic natural hazard events. That's Australian society. It's a reality. I think climate change is real. We're going to work on that in the next 5-10 years. We have to accept that. So it's how do we respond, how do we recover, how do we bounce back stronger? But how do we make sure where we're at in 2025 that we actually have societies that are better prepared, stronger leadership, have all the, mental health and other systems all in place. And we've identified a resilience index. And, it's going to be, it's not controversial, but you've got to call it. There's some parts of our system, Australia, are more resilient than others. Some towns and societies are more resilient than others. So how do we lift those which are most vulnerable? Some it's because of geographic or environmental reasons. Some it's actually because of poor leadership or poor systems in place. So how do we lift that to be at the same level of the most resilient societies that we currently have? The core things about community, systems in place and leadership really are the critical components of a resilient community.
Have the most resilient, least resilient towns been released? Has that data been tabled yet?
We have a resilience index, and in due course, when we launch our resilient communities mission, and as part of this initiative, which is it's an audacious goal for Australia to be the global leader on natural hazard disaster resilience by 2025. And there's a whole lot of clear statements about putting out fires within 1 hour, fires in inception. And part of our first launch was what's called Fire Shield, which talks about the technical ways that we're going to do this properly, but also using Indigenous methodology, how Indigenous Australians used to manage our land, well, still do very, very effectively prior to our modern systems being in place. The second one is about healthy landscapes, understanding our landscapes, measurement tools, etc. The third and final mission's launch will be resilient communities. And in that, one of our stated objectives is to talk about the 50 most resilient communities in Australia and talk about the 50 most vulnerable. So we actually will release it then. Good thing with being with an impact philanthropy like Minderoo, we're perhaps not bound by some of the rules of government. We actually can make the statements we need to make to enable change, and we don't self-deter from that.
My last question, of all of your achievements in uniform and out of uniform, from the personal to the academic, what are you proudest of?
I'm probably proudest of, as a generic statement, not so much what I achieved, but how I achieved it. I'm like us all, we're all imperfect, and not every day is a good day, and you don't always behave in accordance with your values or your principles every day. But I'm probably most proud that after 34 years in the military, I held true to my purpose, my values, and my principles. And I actually did reflect on those most days, including when I failed at those too. So I think that's one. In terms of, in the Navy, I'm very proud that I was involved in the Anzac story, that I commissioned 2 Anzacs, I commanded 2 Anzacs, and I saw, even though they're coming to the end of their life, to be frank now, they're at the last third of their kind of operation employment, to be part of that story, that very successful, not only Australian-built warship class, but what they did over and continue to do over 25, 30 years, and to see these incredible Australians, these women and men that I've served with who are Anzac sailors, and to be part of that, I'm really, when I do eventually end up in an RSL and be telling stories to anyone who listen, that's actually a story I'm going to be very proud of. The one other thing I was asked this question last night. Actually, I was actually at one of my children's schools, and I had the real privilege at in the early 80s of actually meeting Gallipoli World War veterans firsthand in local RSLs at 85, 90. They're a bit grumpy with everyone else, but if you're a young boy, they'd tell you their story. And it used to spellbound. I commanded HMAS Perth and HMAS Parramatta, and both those ships were lost in World War II. And I met the crews of both of those ships. Most of them have now passed on, but my son Dom, as an 8, 9-year-old boy, got to meet the men of HMAS Parramatta and the men of HMAS Perth. And the men of HMAS Perth, most of them, after those both those ships, half the crew survived. In HMAS Perth case, all who survived were prisoners of war on the Thai Burma Railways, and then most of them actually then ended up being sunk again on their way up to Japan. So to actually, for my son, and to listen into their stories with my son firsthand, and to be a bridge of time, like I was with World War I veterans, that was incredibly special as well. Personal experiences, for me, easy one is actually coming home after those long deployments, especially as a captain. First of all, making sure that that you had led and made sure all these people got home to their families. And secondly, to be home with your own family after 6 months away. I mean, there's nothing more rewarding, nothing more special, and nothing more satisfying. I'd say they are. But again, it probably comes back to human experiences. As I said, I think the most special moment in my career was when a crew member said, "Not that's the captain," when they said it's my captain. If a captain asked me what the definition of success is, I'd say it's that.
Well, Lee, I could probably add one to the list of things you should be very proud of, and that's the fact that I've never heard anyone mention your name accompanied by anything other than effusive praise. You are an extremely well-respected, or were a well-respected member of the Australian Defence Force, and clearly continue to be a well-respected member of Australian society. Lee Goddard, thank you very much for speaking with us today.
Here.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Tim. And congratulations on not only your careers, but what you're doing now as well. You continue to make a difference, and I'm very proud of you both.
Thanks, Lee.
Cheers, Lee. See ya.
Lately you've been seeming so down. I just wanna make you smile, don't you know? It's perfect when you do. Lately it's getting hard and loose, I found. Thinking back to that time when I was just getting close to you. And when I think back to that time, oh, the girl I used to know, oh, the one I fell in love with, where's she gone? Cause I need her back tonight. And I say, hey, summer's almost ending, winter's nearly here. This might be our last night spent like this. Put your arms around me and we'll stay up tonight. We don't need no sleep, no, darling, don't you see? Wake up next day, memories burn through my head, oh. How the hell did we get in this tent? I look across and I see you next to me, and everything is alright, oh. Darling, what can you see? We could go back to that time. You're still the girl I used to know, oh, the one I fell in love with. So are you coming back? Cause I need you back tonight. And I say, hey, summer's almost ending, winter's nearly here. This might be our last night spent like this. Put your arms around me and we'll stay up tonight. We don't need no sleep, no, darling, don't you see? No, darling, don't you see? Darling, are you coming back? I really need you, darling, are you coming back tonight? Oh darling, are you coming back? I really need you, darling, are you coming back tonight? And I said, hey, no, come on with me, no, oh darling, don't you see? And I said, hey, you know summer's almost ending, and winter's nearly here. This might be our last night spent like this. Put your arms around me, and we'll stay up tonight. We don't need no sleep, no, darling, don't you see? No, darling, don't you see? Nah, put your arms around me, and we'll stay up tonight. We don't need no sleep, no, darling, don't you see? Oh, darling, don't you see? Darling, don't you? Oh, darling, don't you see?
Now to the debrief. We try to go always a little further in this podcast and greatly appreciate your input. Please let us know your feedback, the good, the bad, or the ugly. Also, if you know someone who is living a life less ordinary, we'd love to hear about them. You can get in touch at debrief@unforgiving60.com. That's debrief@unforgiving60.com. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends and write a review for us on Apple Podcasts. Until next episode, keep filling your unforgiving minutes with 60 seconds worth of distance run. See you next time on the Unforgiving 60.